The healing barn smelled of crushed yarrow and wet straw, and the black wolf had been dying on her floor for 7 nights running. Narista knelt beside him with a bowl of warmed broth balanced on her knee, and she told herself, as she had told herself every night that week, that she was a fool. He was not dying. She had known it since the 3rd visit. No wound festered under the bandages she changed with such tender care. No fever burned in the flesh she pressed her palm against. His breathing was slow and even, his great ribs rising under her hand like the flanks of a sleeping mountain. And when she leaned close to listen to his heart, what she heard was not the ragged stutter of a beast in pain, but the strong, steady drum of a creature perfectly well. And yet every night, just after the last bell of the village temple, he came limping to her door. Every night, he laid himself down in the straw of the corner stall with a theatrical groan that would have fooled no healer worth the name. And every night, Narista closed the barn door behind him, pretended to believe him, and spent the next 2 hours tending to a wolf who did not need tending. She did not know why. She only knew that she lived for it. "You are the worst patient I have ever treated," she told him, setting the broth near his muzzle. "And the most persistent liar I have ever met." The wolf opened one golden eye. It was, she had decided on the 2nd night, the most intelligent eye she had ever seen in an animal. It watched her the way a man watches a woman across a crowded room, and it made her cheeks heat. And she hated that it made her cheeks heat. And she came back to him anyway. "Drink," she said. And he drank. She talked to him while she worked. She had never been a woman with friends in the ordinary sense. The village of Ashenreach was small and suspicious of the quiet orphan girl who had arrived 6 winters ago, with nothing but a bag of herbs and a name no one remembered giving her. The farmers brought her their sick calves and their colicky horses, and their dogs torn by traps in the deep woods, and they paid her in bread and wool, and they kept their daughters a careful distance from her door. She was useful. She was not welcome. So she told the wolf what she told no one else. She told him about her mother's voice, which she could not remember but which she sometimes heard in dreams, singing a lullaby in a language she did not speak. She told him about the ache in her chest that had started 3 months ago and never stopped. A restlessness she could not name, as if some string tied to her heart had begun to pull westward, always westward, toward the mountains she had never crossed. She told him about the small, secret knowledge she had never told another living soul. That when she pressed her hand to a wounded creature and listened, she could hear its pain as a sound, a low, broken song. And that when she matched her own heartbeat to the rhythm of that song and pushed, carefully, gently, the song quieted, and the wound closed, and the creature lived. She told the wolf she did not know what she was. She told him she was afraid to find out. On the 6th night she had kissed the soft fur between his ears, embarrassed by her own loneliness, and whispered that if he were a man she would have married him already. The wolf had made a sound she could not interpret, something low and pained, and had pressed his great head against her collarbone until she laughed and pushed him away. That had been the 6th night. Tonight was the 7th. Tonight was the night everything ended. She heard the bells before she understood what they meant. Not the small temple bell that rang the hours in Ashenreach, but a deeper sound, rolling up from the south, carried on the wind. Bells in sequence, bells in celebration, bells of a kind she had not heard since the old Alpha had died, 4 winters past, and his son had taken the throne in the high city of Tormavale. The wolf at her feet went rigid. Narista looked down at him and saw his ears flatten, his great body coiling as if to flee. And for the first time since he had come to her, he looked not like a liar playing at wounds, but like a creature caught in a trap he had built himself. "What is it?" she asked him. He did not answer. Wolves do not answer. But he rose, and he looked at her with those intelligent eyes, and she felt the small string tied to her heart pull so hard she almost staggered, westward, toward the bells. "Go if you need to," she said softly, because she had always known he would leave one night and not come back, and she had promised herself she would not weep when he did. I will not keep you. The wolf pressed his forehead against her sternum. Hard, hard enough that she felt the bone of his skull through his fur, and she knew in that moment, with a certainty she could not explain, that he was saying goodbye. Then he was gone through the barn door and into the dark. She should have let him go. She should have closed the door, banked the fire, eaten the cold supper on her table, and gone to bed to dream about a wolf who had been the only companion of her lonely years. That was what a sensible woman would have done. That was what the orphan girl of Ashenreach, with her herbs and her quiet gift and her careful distance from the world, had been raised by circumstance to do. Instead, she put on her cloak. Instead, she followed the pull of the string westward, through the forest track she had walked 100 times by daylight but never by moonlight, through brambles that caught at her skirts and branches that slapped her face, toward the distant glow of the high city she had never once in her life approached. She did not ask herself why. She only walked. The trees thinned near the top of the ridge, and then she saw it. Tormavale, the seat of the Alphas of the Marchlands, rising from the valley in tiers of pale stone and torchlight. Every window blazed, every tower flew banners she could not read at that distance. The great bells of the citadel rolled on, and she realized, with a slow, cold understanding that started in her stomach and climbed, that she had heard about this night. Every villager had heard about this night. The pledging. The ceremony in which a new Alpha King chose a mate from among the daughters of the great houses, binding his line to the most powerful blood in the Marchlands. It happened once in a generation, if at all. It had been spoken of in every tavern and every market stall for 6 months, and Nerista, who kept her head down and her conversations short, had only half listened. A pledging. Tonight. She did not understand yet why she was here. She crept closer. There was a servant's road that wound up the back of the Citadel Hill, and she found it by instinct more than by sight, and she climbed it because the string in her chest would not let her stop. A side gate stood open, crowded with late arrivals, cooks and footmen and washerwomen in livery, and no one looked twice at a cloaked figure slipping through with her hood up and her head down. The servants' corridors of a great house are invisible to those who live above them, and she had always been good at being invisible. She found herself somehow in a gallery high above the great hall of Tormavale, pressed into the shadow of a pillar, looking down. The hall was vast. She had never seen so many people in one place in her life. Lords in dark velvets, ladies in gowns stitched with silver thread, warriors in the ceremonial leathers of a dozen packs, all turned toward a raised dais at the far end. Torches blazed from iron sconces. The air rang with breath held. 5 women stood on the dais in gowns the color of first snow, and at the center of the dais, in a long coat of black and steel, stood the Alpha King. Nerista could not see his face from where she hid. She could see only the set of his shoulders, the fall of his dark hair, and the way he stood perfectly still, as if carved. An old man in temple robes lifted his hands. "The candidates have been presented," he said, and his voice filled the hall, though he did not shout. "The houses have spoken. The king will now speak. Verith, son of Corwin, Alpha of the Marchlands, blood of the first running, the realm awaits your choice. Verith." The name struck her like a stone dropped into deep water. She did not know why. She had never heard it before. And yet the string in her chest pulled so hard she had to grip the pillar to stay upright. The Alpha King stepped forward. Something was wrong with the way he walked. She saw it at once, because she was a healer, and she knew how bodies moved when they were whole, and how they moved when they were not. His gait was stiff, jointed, almost mechanical, as if each step were being decided for him a half moment too late. He lifted his head toward the 5 women in white, and for the first time she saw his face. Dark brows, a hard mouth, a jaw cut like stone, and eyes she knew. Golden eyes, the most intelligent she had ever seen in a living creature. The bowl of broth, the straw corner, the forehead pressed against her sternum in goodbye. Every night for 7 nights. Narista's hand flew to her mouth to stifle the sound that tore out of her, and no one in the great hall below heard it, because every person in the great hall was holding their breath, waiting for a king to speak. "I choose," said Varith, son of Corwin, in a voice that was flat and hollow as an empty cup, Kessely of House Merowyn. The hall erupted. A woman in the center of the dais, with hair the color of river ice, and a smile that had been practiced for years in mirrors, stepped forward and laid her hand in his. He raised it to his lips. He did not look for anyone else. He did not hesitate. He did not scan the gallery where a cloaked healer clung to a pillar with one hand clapped over her mouth and the other pressed to a chest where a string she could not name had just been cut. He did not look for her. He had never, his face said, even been hers to lose. Nerista stumbled backward into the dark of the gallery with her heart breaking in a way she had not known a heart could break, because the grief was not only for the man on the dais, it was for the wolf. It was for 7 nights of broth and whispered confessions. It was for a creature who had listened to her tell him her secrets, who had pressed his forehead against her in goodbye, who had known all along. She had told the Alpha King of the Marchlands in the straw of her healing barn that if he were a man, she would have married him. And tonight, he had chosen another. She did not remember the run back through the servants' corridors. She did not remember the side gate or the ridge or the forest track. She remembered only that when she reached her barn, she stood for a long moment in the doorway looking at the corner stall, where the straw was still flattened into the shape of a great body, and then she began, with shaking hands, to pack. She did not see, far behind her on the ridge, the single silver wolf that had followed her from the citadel at a careful distance, belly low, ears back, watching her go. She did not hear, a long while later, the sound that came from the high towers of Tormavale, when the king returned alone to his chambers and realized the 7th night's straw had been for nothing. It was not a howl. It was something worse. She left Ashenreach before the sun rose. She took the herb bag she had arrived with 6 winters ago, and she took her mother's copper ring, and she took a small clay jar of the honey salve she made for burns, because she would need to eat, and she could sell salve at any market from here to the sea. She left the healing barn unlocked. Someone in the village would use it. Someone always did. She did not weep until she was 3 days walking from the ridge. When she wept for the wolf, not the king. The king was a stranger who had stood on a dais and chosen another woman, and a stranger's choice could not cut her the way the wolf's leaving cut her, because she had not known the king, and the king had not known her. But the wolf had listened to her tell him about the lullaby she could not remember. The wolf had drunk her broth. The wolf had let her kiss the fur between his ears and had not laughed at her. Because he could not laugh, because he was a wolf. Except, he had not been a wolf. He had been a man wearing the shape of one, and he had listened to everything, and he had gone back to his high city and chosen a woman in a white gown while Nerista was walking home to feed him. That was the cut. She walked north. She walked away from the mountains that had pulled at her for 3 months, because whatever string had tied her to the west was severed now, and the only direction left was away. She crossed 2 rivers and a range of low hills, and she slept in barns when farmers would have her, and under hedges when they would not. She sold salve at 3 markets. She delivered a calf in a hill croft in exchange for a week's bread. She did not tell anyone her name, because her name had been spoken in a barn to a creature who had been a spy, and she did not want to own it anymore. When she reached the fishing town of Marnmouth on the cold gray coast, she stopped walking. It was as far as she could go. The sea was there, and she had no boat and no coin for passage, and she was tired in a way that had sunk into her bones. Marnmouth had a healer who had grown too old for his work, and a small empty cottage at the edge of the salt marsh that no one wanted, because the damp got into everything. The town council took one look at her hands and her herb bag and gave her the cottage for a nominal rent and a promise of service. She told them her name was Wenna. Wenna settled into the old healer's rounds. She set fishermen's broken fingers and treated the room that came off the sea in winter, and delivered 3 babies in her first month. She was quiet and she was skilled, and the fisherfolk of Marnmouth, who did not care where a useful woman came from as long as she was useful, accepted her without questions. She told herself every morning that she was healing, that the cut would close, that in another season she would wake up and not immediately reach across the cold bed for a great black body that had never slept there. She told herself this for 104 days. On the 105th day, she noticed that the small silver scar on the inside of her left wrist, which she had always assumed was from a childhood accident she could not remember, had begun to burn. She examined it in the light of her kitchen window. It was not reddened. It was not infected. It had simply begun, quietly, to pulse with heat. It beat against her skin in a rhythm that was not her own heartbeat and was not, when she counted, the heartbeat of any creature she had ever listened to. It was a second rhythm, a stranger's rhythm, beating under her skin as if from a great distance. And it was beating, she realized after 3 nights of lying awake and counting, in the exact cadence of a creature that was not sleeping. A creature that was searching. She did not let herself think the word. She did not let herself think the name. She boiled salve. She set bones. She delivered babies. She did not think about a dais, or a white gown, or a black wolf in the straw of her old barn. But the scar on her wrist beat on and on and on. And sometimes, when she pressed her palm flat against it to make it stop, she felt, for one impossible instant, a second palm pressed against the other side of her skin from very far away. The first frost of her second winter in Marmouth came on the morning the trader arrived from the south. He was a thin man with a cart of pewter goods and pickled fish, and he sat in the common room of the tavern with a mug of hot wine and talked, as traders do, about the roads. Wenna was there because the innkeeper's wife had come down with the cough that was going around the town, and Wenna had brought her a tincture. She was not listening to the trader. She was counting out the doses on the bar. Then he said a word, and she stopped counting. Tormavale, he said. Mad as a beaten dog, that place. I would not go through the marchlands again for twice the gold. The innkeeper grunted. Still? Worse. The king is not holding court. He has not held court in more than a year. The queen sits alone on the dais and the council runs the business, and the king is, they say, gone more often than he is there. Gone where? Nobody tells. But when he is in the citadel, you can hear him, through the walls, nights on end. Hear him how? The trader leaned in. They say he is hunting. Hunting what? A woman. The tincture bottle slipped half an inch in Wenna's hand. She steadied it. She did not turn around. A woman he does not name, the trader went on, enjoying his audience. A ghost woman. He has sent his shields out in 3s and 4s, north and south and east. He pays handsome for any sighting. Tall, thin, dark hair, a gift with animals. The shields do not say why he wants her. But every village between here and the mountains has been asked. I was asked 3 times on the road up. 3 times, the innkeeper said, impressed despite himself. The last time was in Hollowreed, the week before last. A captain of the king's shield, a big gray-haired man with a scar through his brow, leading a company of 6. He asked after a tall, thin woman with a gift for healing beasts. The publican told him no such woman had come that way. The captain went east. Wenna finished counting the doses. Her hands did not shake, because she had trained her hands long ago not to shake when it mattered. She left the tincture on the bar with instructions, and she walked out into the cold morning, and she walked home along the seawall, and she did not allow herself to think until she had closed her own door behind her. Then she sat down on her hearthstone and pressed both hands to her mouth. A year. More than a year. The trader had said, more than a year. which meant he had been hunting her since very close to the night of the pledging. Since the night he had chosen Kessely of House Merowen and walked off a dais with another woman's hand in his. Why would a man hunt the healer he had deceived? What was there left to do to her? She had lived 150 of her days in this cottage, telling herself that she understood what had happened in the straw of her barn. He had been a wolf who had enjoyed her company, a king who had amused himself with a village woman in the weeks before his pledging, a stag using a doe for sport before the hunt. She had built a whole story around this understanding, and she had used the story to eat and sleep and set bones and walk on. A man who had amused himself did not hunt his amusement for a year. A man who had been playing a game did not go mad when the game ended. The scar on her wrist, quiet for a fortnight, began to burn. She looked down at it, and she watched it pulse, and she realized, slowly, that it had been pulsing in its stranger's rhythm all along, and she had simply learned to ignore the sound the way one learns to ignore the sea. It was not ignoring her. It was calling. She rose from the hearth on shaking legs and went to her small back window, and she looked out across the salt marsh toward the low gray hills, and she told herself firmly that she would not walk west. She would not cross those hills. She would not seek the man who had chosen another. She had walked away with what dignity she could carry, and she would keep it. But when she turned from the window, she saw the flower on her doorstep. It had not been there when she came home. She would have seen it. She had stepped across that stone half an hour before, and the stone had been bare. It was a small white flower, 5-petaled, with a throat of pale gold. It did not grow on the cold gray coast. She had never seen it here in 2 winters. It grew in the high meadows of the marchlands, under the shoulders of the western mountains, in the country she had never crossed. She bent and picked it up. The petals were still dew-wet. It had been cut within the hour. A second flower lay, she saw now, on the path beyond her gate, and a third, beyond that, in the soft mud of the track that led across the marsh. A trail, laid with a lover's care. Laid by someone who knew exactly which cottage was hers, and exactly which window she looked from, and exactly how long it would take her to come to the door. Laid by someone who was not going to knock. She raised her eyes from the third flower, slowly, to the tree line at the far edge of the marsh. And in the thin gray light of the winter morning, in the shadow of the leafless alders, something enormous and black was sitting perfectly still in the grass, watching her. It had come back. She did not move. The black shape in the alders did not move either. It sat the way only a great predator sits, perfectly balanced on its haunches, head lowered just enough to make itself smaller than it was, golden eyes holding hers across the length of the marsh. She could not see from this distance whether it was the same wolf. Every black wolf in the world, she told herself, would look the same at 100 paces in winter light. And yet the way it sat, the careful tilt of its head, the deliberate stillness of it, waiting for her to be ready, was the stillness of a creature who had lain 7 nights in the straw of her barn pretending to need her. Her hand closed around the 3 white flowers so hard the stems bruised. "No," she said, aloud, to the empty marsh. The wolf did not move. "I told you I would not keep you. You chose. Go back to what you chose." The wolf lowered its great head to the grass between its paws and stayed there. A gesture of submission. She had seen dogs do it. She had never seen a wild wolf do it, because no wild wolf had ever needed to ask a village healer for anything. Her throat closed on a sound that was half a laugh and half something worse, and she turned, deliberately, and walked back into her cottage, and shut the door, and slid the bar across. She stood with her back against the wood and waited for her legs to steady. They did not steady. She went to the kitchen and began, with hands that no longer pretended to be calm, to put her life into a bag. The herb bag again, always the herb bag. The copper ring. The jar of honey salve. Half full. A second cloak, because the nights were cold now. A small knife her neighbor had sharpened for her last month, when she had complained that her old one would not cut leather. She would walk out the back. There was a path through the reeds to the fisherfolk's road, and the road ran north along the cliffs, and she had not walked north before, and north was not west, and that was enough of a reason. She would not stay in this cottage and wait for the black wolf to cross the marsh at nightfall. She would not open her door to him. She would not listen to whatever he had come to say, whatever flower he had come to leave, whatever pretty story of madness and searching he thought he could lay at her feet to make her forgive him for the dais and the white gown. She had forgiven him the 7 nights. She was done forgiving. The knock came before she had reached the back door. It was not a wolf's knock. Wolves do not knock. It was the firm, measured, 3-stroke knock of a man in uniform who has knocked on a great many doors in his life, and Wenna, halfway across her kitchen with the bag in her hand, went absolutely still. Mistress Wenna. The voice through the door was not young. It was weathered, low, respectful. My name is Torin Halwy, captain of the Western Shields. I am alone. I am unarmed, and I will not enter unless you open the door. I will stand here until you do. She did not move. I have been looking for you for 13 months, the voice went on, and there was something in it that was almost tired, almost tender, almost kind. Please. I am an old man. The marsh is cold. She set the bag down very slowly on the table. She thought of the trader's words. A big gray-haired man with a scar through his brow, leading a company of 6. She had been counted in 1,000 villages and missed in all of them, and now, finally, had been found in a cottage on the salt marsh because she had stood in her doorway looking at a white flower long enough for a scout to see. She thought briefly of the knife. Then she crossed the kitchen and lifted the bar and opened the door. He was alone, as he had said. A tall man of perhaps 60, broad through the shoulders, with iron-gray hair cropped close and a scar that ran through his left eyebrow down to the cheekbone. He wore the dark leathers of a shield captain but no weapon at his belt. His hands were empty and held a little out from his sides so that she could see they were empty. He did not look like a man who had come to harm her. He looked like a man who had come to deliver a message and was afraid of how it would be received. "Mistress," he said, and inclined his head. "That is not my name," she said. "No," he agreed quietly. "It is not. Your name is Nerista of Ashenreach, orphan of the southern village, taken in by the old herb woman Mel, who died the winter before last. You came north along the coastal road 13 months ago. You have delivered 19 babies in this town. You set the broken arm of the innkeeper's boy 2 months past and did not charge for it because the family could not pay." Nerista gripped the doorframe. "I know a great deal about you," Torin Halwy said. "I have spent 13 months learning. I did not come sooner because I did not know where you were. I came today because yesterday my king collapsed in the great hall of Tormavale, and the only word he has spoken since is the name he has been saying in his sleep for more than a year, and I cannot any longer in good conscience stand by and watch him die without having tried this door." "He is not dying," Nerista heard herself say. "He is," Torin said. "Slowly. Over months. The way a wolf dies when it is separated from the other half of its soul. I have seen it twice before in my life. Both times it ended the same way. May I come in?" She stepped aside. He entered with the careful economy of an old soldier who did not wish to startle anyone. He did not look around. He did not comment on the herbs hanging from the rafters or the small neat cottage she had built from nothing. He sat, at her gesture, in the chair by the hearth, and he set his hands on his knees and waited. "Who are you?" she asked. "First Shield of the Marchlands. I served the old Alpha Corwin for 30 years, and I have served his son Varith for 7. And you come to me without his knowledge. No, mistress. I come to you with his last instruction. He gave it to me before he collapsed. He said, 'If you find her, and she will not come, do not force her. Tell her the truth, and let her choose.' Then he fell. Nerista sat down on the stool across from him because her legs would no longer hold her. What truth? Torin Halwi looked at his hands for a long moment before he answered. 7 nights before the pledging, he said, my king went missing from the citadel. He had done this before. He was a wolf who needed the forest more than most. We did not worry the first night or the second. By the 4th, I sent out shields. They found nothing. On the 8th morning he came back on foot through the south gate, and he walked straight past me and up to his chambers and locked the door. He did not come out until the day of the pledging. She could not speak. I asked him later where he had been. He told me. Torin looked up, and his eyes held hers. He had been in a healer's barn in a southern village. He had been lying in the straw every night pretending to be a wounded animal, because he had seen the healer in the market the previous autumn, and he had not been able to stop thinking about her. And he did not know how to court a woman who had not been raised to be courted by a king. So he had gone to her in the shape she would let into her house. Nerista put her hand over her mouth. He said he knew it was dishonest. He said he meant to tell her on the 8th night. He was going to come to her as a man, unarmed, and stand at her door and tell her everything, and ask her to be his queen before the council forced him to a pledging he did not want. That was his plan. He had already written the proclamation. I saw it with my own eyes. It named her consort before the houses. Then why, she whispered, did he stand on that dais? Because on the 7th night, while he was in her barn, his cousin came to him. She closed her eyes. Malveth Corwen, Torin said. Son of my king's uncle. The man who expected to inherit the marchlands before Vareth was born, and has never quite forgiven the accident of his own late birth. Malveth came to the barn at dusk on the 7th night, before my king could leave. He said he had seen the king come and go to that village, and wished only to speak with him. My king, trusting him, came out. Malveth embraced him in greeting. On the back of that embrace, between the shoulder blades where no wolf can reach to lick, he pressed a strip of silverthorn resin against my king's skin. Nerista opened her eyes. Silverthorn, she said slowly. I have read of it. It is not poison. It is a binding. Yes. It cannot kill. It only compels. And it can only be administered by someone the victim already trusts, because it must be pressed skin to skin and held long enough to soak in. My king did not know his cousin had given it to him. He thought they had embraced and parted. He went back to the citadel that night to make his plan, and he did not know until he woke 3 days after the pledging that he had spent those 3 days walking where he was told to walk and saying what he was told to say. Malveth's hand on his shoulder in every room. Malveth's voice in his ear at every decision. And on the dais, Malveth standing at the foot of the steps, and my king, looking at him, and naming the woman Malveth had chosen. Nerista felt the cottage tilt. Kessely of House Merowan, she said. Malveth's lover, Torin said quietly, for 7 years, promised to him in private when she was 16. The House Merowan could not place her on the throne through Malveth, because Malveth is not the Alpha. So they placed her through Vareth, and planned that Vareth would have a short reign. She stood up, because she could not sit. She walked to the small back window and stood looking out at the marsh without seeing it. How, she said, do I know you are not also lying? You do not, Torin Halwi said. You must choose whether to believe me. But I brought proof, mistress, because I knew you would ask. She heard him stand behind her. She heard the rustle of paper. She did not turn. This is the proclamation, he said. The one he wrote the night before the 7th night, in his own hand. I kept it hidden for more than a year, because I did not know what else to do with it, and because as long as I had it, I knew what my king had meant to do. It has your name on it, mistress. Nerista of Ashenreach. He knew your true name. He had known it for months. She turned. The parchment in his hand was folded twice. The wax seal was broken. He held it out to her without stepping closer, and she took it, and she read it standing at the window in the gray winter light. And her hands did shake then, badly enough that she had to lay the paper on the sill to finish it. It was written in a fine, sharp hand. It named her. It named her gift. It named the house she would have founded. It was dated 6 days before the pledging. She set the paper down. She turned her face to the window so the captain would not see it. "The scar," she said, when she could trust her voice. "On my wrist." "Yes, mistress. It began to burn 105 days after I came here." He tried, on that day, to end his own life. He had begun to understand, by then, what had been done. He could not find you. He could not rule. He walked into the winter river north of the citadel and his shields had to drag him out. I believe, though I cannot prove it, that the scar on your wrist answered the moment his heart nearly stopped. That is how these bindings work when they are true. You did not know, but you were holding him to the world. Nerista made a sound she did not know she was capable of making. After a moment, Torin Halwi said gently, "There is one thing more. I did not come here only to tell you this, and let you choose." She turned. "Malveth Corwin learned 4 days ago that I had found you. He must have a spy in my company, though I cannot yet name which of my shields has taken his gold. I left Tormavale with 6 men. I rode into Marnmouth alone. I will not tell you what happened to the other 5, because I am still sorting grief from duty, and the story is not yet fit for telling. I am telling you only this." He paused. "There is a second company behind me on the coastal road," he said, "wearing my colors, not my men. They will reach this town by my reckoning before the sun sets tomorrow. And when they find you, mistress, they will not ask you to come. They will put you in a cart with your hands tied, and they will take you south through the hill country to a place I will not be able to follow, and they will bury you in a ditch there before the week is out, because as long as you are alive, my king cannot be killed. The binding will hold him to the world whether he wills it or not. Kill you, and the binding breaks, and then the grief alone does the work, and Malveth inherits a marchland with a dead king and no heir." Outside the window, across the marsh, in the shadow of the alders, the black wolf that had been sitting in the grass for an hour lifted its great head and looked toward the southern road. Nerista stood at the window for a long time. Torin Halwi did not hurry her. He sat back down in the chair by the hearth, folded his hands, and let the cottage fill up with silence. He had, she realized, been a soldier long enough to know the difference between a person deciding and a person unraveling, and he was willing to wait out either. Her thoughts came in pieces. She thought of the 8th night, the night after the wolf had pressed his forehead to her sternum in goodbye. She had set out the broth anyway. She had banked the fire and left the barn door ajar and sat up until dawn in the straw of the corner stall, and when he had not come, she had told herself it was better. He was wild. He had chosen the forest. That was what wild things did. She thought now of where he had actually been on that 8th night. Already in his cousin's grip. Already walking where he was told to walk. Already, perhaps, fighting some slow fog in his own head and losing. She thought of the proclamation on her windowsill with her name written in his hand, and of the 3 white flowers she had dropped somewhere between the doorstep and the kitchen table, and of the great black creature sitting perfectly still in the alders across the marsh. She thought of the second company of riders coming up the coastal road. "How far?" she asked without turning. "Are they behind you?" "A day, if they ride hard. Less if they changed horses at Colbarrow. And you came alone because you did not know which of your men to trust." "Yes. You have told me an enormous amount, Captain Halwi, and asked me nothing in return. I was told to tell you the truth and let you choose. I was not told to bargain." She turned from the window. "I have chosen," she said. He stood up. "I will not go to Tormavale with you," she said, and his face did not change, but she saw something in his shoulders go still. "Not yet. I cannot walk into that citadel on the word of a captain I met an hour ago, no matter how kind his eyes are. But I will not stay in this cottage to be taken out of it in a cart either. You have a wolf in my alders, Captain Halwi. I assume he is here with your knowledge. He outran me the moment the rider reached him with the news that you had been found." I could not have stopped him if I tried. Bring him in. Torin hesitated only a moment. Then he went to the door and opened it wide and stepped back into the kitchen and did not call or whistle or gesture. He only stood in the open doorway and waited. The wolf came across the marsh in the pale light. He came slowly, low to the ground, the way he had come to her barn door on 7 winter nights. He stopped at the edge of her garden. He lowered his great head. And then, with a deliberate care that she understood now was not the care of an animal, but the courtesy of a man inhabiting an animal's body, he lay down flat on his belly in the mud, with his muzzle between his paws, and waited to be invited closer. Nerista's eyes filled. She had spent all those long months teaching herself not to want him. Month after month laying stone over the pit in her chest. And he was lying in her garden in the mud like a dog hoping to be forgiven, and the whole wall came down in one breath. "Come in," she said, and her voice was not steady. He came. He did not stand until he was over her threshold, and even then he did not straighten fully. He crossed the kitchen with his head low and his tail down, and he stopped in front of the hearth, and he turned his golden eyes up to her, and he waited. She looked at him for a long time. Then she said, "Change." The shift was nothing like what she had imagined, in the quiet hours when she had let herself imagine at all. There was no burst of light, no violent rending. The black fur simply receded, the limbs lengthened, the shape gathered itself inward and upward, and a man unfolded onto his knees in the middle of her kitchen. He was tall. He was not dressed, because wolves do not wear clothes, but Torin, with a soldier's practical delicacy, had already lifted her winter cloak from its peg and was draping it across the kneeling man's shoulders. The man accepted the cloak without looking at it. He did not look at Torin. He did not look at the cottage, the herbs, the hearth, the window. He looked up at Nerista. And he looked. She saw at last. Terrible. The Alpha King she had glimpsed across the great hall of Tormavale had been carved from stone, hard-mouthed, distant. This man was the ruin of that one. His face was gaunt. His dark hair was longer than a king's should be, unkempt where he had not bothered to cut it. There were hollows under his cheekbones that had not been there when he had lain in her barn and let her feed him broth. His mouth, when he tried to speak, moved once without sound and then closed again. "Varith," she said. He closed his eyes. "Look at me." He opened them. He was weeping. She had not expected that. Kings did not weep, in the stories she had been told, and Alpha Kings did not weep at all, and this one was weeping silently on her kitchen floor, with his hands loose at his sides, as if he had forgotten he had hands. "I do not know yet," she said, "whether I forgive you. I do not know yet whether I ever will. I need you to hear that before anything else." He nodded. "I am not," she said, "the woman who lived in the barn in Ashenreach. That woman trusted a wounded animal, and the animal was a man, and the man stood on a dais and said another woman's name. I walked out of that woman 13 months ago, and I am not walking back into her for you." He nodded again. "I am also," she said, and here her voice broke a little and she had to draw breath. "Not going to leave you on my kitchen floor, because Captain Halwi tells me that if I do, you will die. And I have not spent 13 months healing strangers to refuse a man, the thing I have given to every stray dog in this town. Get up." He did not move. "Varith, get up." He rose. The cloak hung from his shoulders. He was shaking, she saw, in small continuous tremors, the way a body shakes when it has not slept in days. "Sit," she said, and pointed to the second chair by the hearth. He sat. She knelt on the flagstones and reached for his hand without thinking, because he was a patient in her house, and her hands had always known what to do with a patient. And the moment her palm touched the back of his, she felt the stranger's rhythm under her wrist fall silent for the first time in more than 8 months. She bowed her head over their joined hands and wept. At last, the tears she had not let herself weep, for any of it. After a long while he spoke. "I went to your barn," he said. His voice was low and hoarse, a voice not used to speaking. "On the morning after I woke. I rode through the night. The straw was still flat where I had slept. The broth bowl was still on the floor. You had gone out the north door. I followed you 3 days up the coast road, and I lost the trail in a rainstorm at the crossing of the Mern. I have not, in all the time since, been able to stop looking." "I know," she said. "The scar on my wrist knew. It was the only thing that knew you were alive." "Torin would not tell me. He said I would kill myself trying to reach you, and he was correct. He told me only when he had already sent the rider. He is a good man. He is the best man I have. He has kept me breathing for a year." Torin Halwi, standing by the door, cleared his throat in the manner of a soldier who did not wish to interrupt, but was going to. "Mistress, your grace. The second company." Varith's head came up. "They are a day behind me," Torin said. "Less. We must be out of this cottage before nightfall." "To where?" Nerista said. "Not Tormavale," Torin said. "The city is Malveth's. He has the council, he has the garrison, he has the queen. We cannot take you in through the gates. There is a holding in the northern hills that was the Alpha Corin's hunting seat, 2 days' ride from here. It is defensible. It is loyal. We can take you there and hold it while I send word to the houses that have not yet declared for Malveth. And there are such houses. 4, perhaps 5, it is not many. But it is enough to begin." Varith had not let go of her hand. She felt his grip tighten. "Nerista," he said quietly. "I will not take you anywhere. I will ask. If you want to stay in this cottage, I will stand in your garden as a wolf for the rest of my life and die in it. And Malveth can have the marchlands, because I have already chosen, and I will not unchoose now because a captain says there is a hunting lodge. Do you understand me? I will ask." "I understand. Will you come?" She looked at him. She looked at the ruin of him. She looked at the hand holding hers, the hand of the creature she had fed broth to on 7 winter nights, the hand of the king she had watched choose another woman from a gallery, the hand of the man whose cousin would kill her within the week if she stayed in this cottage. "Yes," she said. "I will come." She had barely spoken the word when the scar on her wrist went cold. Not warm. Cold. A deep, sudden cold, as if something had been cut. Varith's hand in hers jerked. His eyes went wide. Torin, at the door, straightened sharply and reached, by old habit, for a sword that was not at his hip. "What?" Nerista breathed. And outside the cottage, beyond the garden, beyond the marsh, from the direction of the coastal road that ran south, came the sound of hoofbeats. Not one rider. Many. The second company had ridden through the night. They were not a day behind Torin Halwi. They had been half a day behind him, and they had closed the half-day in the dark, and they were coming up the track to her cottage now at a dead gallop, and there were more of them than Torin had said. Nerista rose from the flagstones with her hand still in the king's. "Captain Halwi," she said, "how many do you count?" Torin was already at the window. 14, he said grimly. "Perhaps more. And we are 3. "We are 2 and a king," Torin said, "and a king is not counted like a man. But yes, mistress, we are 3. "The back door," Torin said. "Now." Nerista did not move. Her hand was still in Varith's. She was looking at the small jars on her shelves, the honey salve, the willow bark tincture, the dried foxglove she kept locked in the brown jar at the top for cases she did not like to think about. And she was doing, very rapidly, the arithmetic of a healer who had just been told she had 14 men to get through. "Torin," she said, "can you fight as a wolf?" "I can. I am not as young as I was." "Varith?" He did not answer in words. He rose from the chair, and the cloak fell from his shoulders, and between one breath and the next the man was gone, and the great black wolf stood in her kitchen, head nearly brushing the rafters, and the look in his golden eyes was not the look of the creature that had lain in her straw. This was the creature whose cousin had put a hand between his shoulder blades and stolen a year of his life. "Good," she said. She went, not to the back door but to her shelves. "What are you doing?" Torin demanded. "Buying us time." She pulled down the brown jar. She opened her herb bag on the table and began, with the swift, practiced movements of a woman who had prepared this tincture 1,000 times, and never for this use, to measure. Foxglove, nightshade, in the smallest possible dose, a binding of beeswax. She did not want to kill the men on the track. She had taken no vow, but she had taken a habit, and her habit was healing, and killing 14 men to save 3 would cost her something she could not spare. But she could drop them, every one of them. For an hour, perhaps 2, if she did the mixture right, and if they drank. "They will not drink from a stranger," Torin said, reading her hands. "They will drink from a captain." He went very still. "No," he said. "Captain Halwi, they are wearing your colors. They think you are in this cottage. If you walk out to them with a skin of wine and tell them the healer has barred her door, and you are waiting them out because the king wants her alive, they will drink. They are tired. They have ridden through the night. They think they are among their own. Mistress, if one of them recognizes me for what I am, instead of what they have been told I am, they will cut me down in the road. Then speak fast." He looked at her for a long moment, and then he laughed, very quietly, without humor. "Corwin warned me about southern healers. He said they were all half-soldier. I did not believe him. Take the skin, Captain." She was already corking the small bottle into the wineskin that hung by her door. She pressed it into his hands. He weighed it once, and his soldier's face settled, and he nodded. "The back door in 10 minutes, he said. "If I am not at it, go without me." "Captain." "Mistress?" "Thank you." He bowed his head to her once, in a gesture that belonged to a court and not a kitchen, and then he was out the front door with the wineskin over his shoulder and his hands open at his sides, walking down the track toward 14 armed men with the easy weariness of a captain who had been waiting for his relief. Nerissa did not watch him go. She pulled her cloak from the peg. She pulled on her walking boots. She swept the small things that mattered into her herb bag, the copper ring, the jar of honey salve, the little knife. And, as an afterthought, the folded proclamation from the windowsill, because it had her name on it, and she was not leaving her name behind in this cottage. The black wolf watched her from the middle of the kitchen. "Out the back," she told him. "You go first. If anyone comes through my garden, I want them to meet you before they meet me." He went. She took one last look at the cottage she had built from nothing, at the herbs hanging from the rafters, at the small hearth where she had sat many months ago, and realized the scar on her wrist was beating with a stranger's rhythm, at the chair in which a weeping king had just sat on her flagstones. She left. The salt marsh in the pale winter afternoon was brown and gray, and the wind was cutting off the sea. The path through the reeds was narrow. The black wolf moved ahead of her without sound. She could hear, distantly, the sound of horses on the front track. And then, after a minute, the sound of voices raised in greeting, because Torin Halwi had walked into them exactly as she had said he would. She did not know whether he would survive the next hour. She did not let herself think about it. She was a healer in flight with a wolf, and a sack of herbs, and a year of grief in her chest, and the only work in front of her now was to put distance between her body and her cottage. They walked for 2 hours before the wolf's ears came up. He stopped on the path. She stopped behind him. They were at the eastern edge of the marsh by then, where the ground began to rise into low hills of heather and gorse, and the coastal road was well out of sight behind them. The wind had shifted. It came now from the hills ahead, carrying the scent of something neither of them could see. The wolf's hackles rose. Nerissa reached for the little knife in her bag. A shape stepped out of the gorse. Not a horse. Not a man in Shield's leathers. A woman. Tall. Slight. Wrapped in a dark riding cloak, with her hood up against the wind. She had stepped onto the path 10 yards ahead of them as quietly as a heron, and she was holding her hands out from her sides, empty, in the same gesture Torin Halwy had used at her door. Nerista of Ashenreach, the woman said. Nerista did not speak. My name is Corinth. I am a cousin of the king, though not of the branch you have been warned about. I have ridden 3 days from the north to find you. I need you to come with me. Now, before the king's wolf decides I am a threat. The black wolf's growl vibrated through the ground under Nerista's boots. Corinth who? Nerista said. Corinth Halwy, Torin's daughter. The wolf did not stop growling, but his ears flicked. Nerista saw it. Torin did not speak of a daughter. Torin does not speak of me. I left the citadel when I was 19. He has not forgiven me for it. The woman pushed her hood back. She had gray eyes and a scar through her own left eyebrow that was a finer version of her father's, and Nerista, looking at her, believed her before she had decided to. Why are you here? Because I have spent the last year doing what my father could not. I have been living inside Malveth Corwin's household as a cook's assistant. I am the reason your captain knew to come here. I am the reason he knew which of his men to leave behind. And I am the reason I can tell you now that Malveth does not only want you dead, he wants you dead in a specific place, at a specific hour, witnessed by a specific person, because the Silverthorn binding on my cousin the king can be permanently locked, rather than simply broken by your death, if the right ritual is performed. Nerista felt the ground shift. Locked how? If you are killed in Vareth's presence, by Vareth's hand, under Malveth's witness, the binding does not break. It completes. Vareth becomes Malveth's creature for the rest of his natural life, not a puppet for 3 days at a time, but a living throne with Malveth's hand on the back of it. Forever. That is what he is preparing. The hunting lodge my father is leading you to is known to Malveth. He has had it watched for months. If you ride into it with my cousin, you will be riding into the ritual. The black wolf had stopped growling. He was staring at Corinth Halwy as if he had not drawn breath in a minute. Where? Nerista said. Do I ride instead? North, Corinth said. Not east. My father's plan is a good one for a war, but this is not a war yet. It is still a killing. You come north with me, over the hills, to a village the Council of Houses does not know is loyal. I can hide you there for a month, perhaps 2. Long enough for my father to rally the 4 houses he can rally, and long enough for us to take Malveth before Malveth takes you. And Vareth comes with us. Vareth, said Nerista carefully, cannot be in my presence in a ritual place, according to what you have just told me. He cannot come. Corinth's face, which had been composed until that moment, did something complicated. Yes, she said. That is the difficulty. The black wolf made a sound Nerista had never heard a wolf make. He cannot be within 100 miles of me, Nerista said slowly, until the binding is broken or Malveth is dead. Yes. Or else any man in Malveth's pay who catches us in one room together can perform the ritual that ends him. Yes. So we have ridden an hour from my cottage to meet. And now we separate. Yes. Nerista looked down at the great black creature at her side. He was not looking at Corinth anymore. He was looking at her. She had spent the last hour walking behind him through the reeds, and she had not known, the entire walk, that this was what was waiting at the end of it, that she would be given him back in her kitchen for a quarter of an hour, for the length of a held hand and a whispered promise, and then would be told to let him go again. Her eyes filled. She did not let them spill. Vareth, she said. He closed the distance between them and laid his great head against her ribs, the way he had laid it against her in the straw of her barn 100 times, the way he had laid it against her on the night of the pledging in goodbye. Go with your cousin's daughter, she said. Hear me. Go north, but not with me. You will be told where I am when it is safe. Do you understand? He did not move. Vareth. If you come with me, Malveth wins. If you come with me, You die, and I die, and your cousin sits on the throne of the marchlands with a dead alpha's skull on the wall behind him. Do you understand me?" The great body against her ribs shuddered. "I have just found you again," she said, and her voice broke on it. "And I am sending you away, and I will see you on the other side of this. I swear it on every creature I have ever healed. Do you understand?" He lifted his head. The golden eyes held hers. Then, slowly, with a dignity that belonged to something much older than either of them, the great black wolf stepped away from her. 3 paces. 4. He did not turn his back on her, because a wolf does not turn his back on his mate when he leaves her, but he put distance between his body and hers, and he laid himself down in the heather a short way off, with his head on his paws, waiting for her to go first. So she had to be the one to turn. She turned. Corinth Halwi took her arm gently, and they walked together up the path into the hills, and Nerista did not look back, because she was afraid if she looked back, she would run back, and they had just ridden an hour from a cottage and 14 men to be told that running back would kill him. Behind her, on the path, the black wolf lay in the heather and did not move. He was still there when the light began to go. They walked until the stars came out. Corinth Halwi did not speak for the first hour, and Nerista was grateful, because her throat was closed on something that would have come out as a sound she could not take back. They went up through the gorse and over the shoulder of the first hill, and down into a long, shallow valley, where a stream ran black under the winter sky, and the moon rose behind them. And Nerista did not look back at the marsh even once, because she had promised herself on the crest of the hill that she would not. At the streambed, Corinth stopped. "There is a stand of rowan on the far bank," she said quietly. "We will sleep an hour. No fire. My horse is tied in the scrub beyond. I could not bring her closer without the king's wolf scenting her. He scented her anyway. I know. He did not come for her, though. That is the courtesy of the thing. Come." They forded the stream. The water was ice. Nerista did not feel it. They reached the rowans, and Corinth produced from beneath her cloak a small oiled package of bread and hard cheese, and a stoppered flask that turned out to contain, improbably, hot tea still warm enough to soften the bread. Nerista ate because she had been taught a long time ago that a healer who did not eat on a march could not heal at the end of it. She did not taste anything. "Who taught you," she asked after a while, "to live inside another man's household for a year without being found out?" "My mother," Corinth said. "Your mother was a spy." "My mother was a kitchen maid at the old Alpha's court who watched 3 lords try to poison him and poisoned 2 of them back before anyone noticed. She taught me to be useful and quiet. It is a set of skills that transfers. Is she still in Tormavale? My mother died the winter before last. Of the lung fever, not of anything dramatic. I was in Malveth's pantries by then and could not come home for the burning. My father buried her alone. That is one of the reasons he does not speak of me." Nerista looked at her across the dark. "Your father told me you had not forgiven him." "My father is wrong," Corinth said. "I have forgiven him. I have not told him. That is not the same thing." She tore a piece of bread in half and handed the larger piece to Nerista. "Eat. We have 6 hours of walking before we reach the village. I cannot carry you, and my horse cannot carry both of us over this ground." Nerista ate. They walked from the 2nd hour before dawn until the morning was well up, and they did reach a village, though Nerista would not have called it that. It was 7 stone houses grouped around a single well in a fold of the northern hills, and it had no sign and no road going further, and the people who came to their doors at the sound of the horse did not ask questions. An old woman with hands like knotted roots took Nerista's arm and led her into a low house that smelled of peat smoke and lamb fat, and put her in a bed under 3 wool blankets, and closed the shutters, and went out again without speaking a word. Nerista slept for 14 hours. When she woke, it was dark again, and the old woman was sitting at the foot of the bed with a bowl of broth. "You are Mev," Nerista said. She did not know how she knew. I am. The old woman had a voice like the sound a stone makes when it is struck with another stone. Eat your broth. Then we will talk about your hands. My hands. Corinth Halwi says you can hear what is wrong with a beast, that you have been doing it since you were small, and you do not know where it came from. I can tell you where it came from, if you want to know. But eat first. Nerista drank the broth. When the bowl was empty, Mev took it from her and set it on the floor, and folded her old hands in her lap, and said, Your mother was called Saravel. She was my niece. She ran from this village when she was 17, because a man from the western houses came through here in the spring of a bad year, and told her she could be a great lady if she went with him. She went. The man was not as great as he said he was. He used her for 3 years and left her with a baby and a name that was not hers, and a set of skills nobody in his country understood, because our women have always had the healing song, and his country had forgotten it. When the baby was 4, she died of a winter cough that our songs could have closed if she had come home. The baby was sent south with a traveling herb woman who had passed through her village and pitied her. The herb woman's name was Mel. Nerista closed her eyes. Mel died 3 winters ago. I know. I have known where you were, child, for most of your life. I did not come for you because you were safe. I sent word to Mel once a year by the Eastern Post, and she sent word back, and I knew you were growing into your hands even if you did not know what your hands were. Then the post stopped. I sent my own granddaughter south to find you, and she found a burnt barn and a new healer in a seacoast town with the wrong name, and by then, you had already been found by other people. So I waited. The song, Nerista said, the matching of heartbeats. That is the healing song. It is the first half of it. The second half is what you have not yet used. You would not have used it in a barn in a southern village, because you would not have needed to. You use the second half when a beast is not merely wounded, but is being killed by something inside it that has no business being there. Something that was put there. Something that is not a sickness, but a binding. Nerista opened her eyes. Silverthorn, she said. I do not know the name you are using, but yes, the second half of the song is for that. Our grandmothers used it in a time when the Western lords used to put their bindings on our sons to make soldiers of them. That is why the Western lords eventually stopped coming to this country. They could not keep what they took. Can you teach me? No, Mev said. I cannot teach you. You were born with it the way you were born with the first half. I can only tell you what it is for, and tell you that it will cost you. The first half is given freely. The second half takes blood. Whose blood? Yours. Not a great deal, but enough that you will know you have paid. Nerista lay back on the pillow and looked at the low beams of the ceiling. How long, she said, before Malveth Corwin finds this village? He will not find this village in time. This country is old, and old country keeps its children. That is why Corinth Halwi brought you here. You are safe for as long as you stay. It will be a month, perhaps 6 weeks, before the thing in your king is ready to break. In that time, you will learn what your hands do when they are asked. Then you will go south again, and you will do what your grandmothers did, and the binding will be lifted, and you will not be alone when you lift it. I will not be alone. No, child. The king's cousin is not the only one with spies. Nerista turned her head on the pillow. Mev, child. On the night I left the marsh, there was a wolf in the heather. He lay down and watched me go. He lay there, Mev said, until my granddaughter's husband reached him in the dawn and told him the name of the village he had to ride to instead. He did not want to go. They had to put a rope on him. That is not a thing you do to an alpha king lightly. But it was done, and he is where he needs to be. And he has not eaten in 2 days, which is a thing my granddaughter's husband has also sent word of. He has not eaten. No. Nerista sat up slowly. I will send broth. You will not, Mev said. You will sleep. He has taken broth from your hands for 7 nights in his life, and he will not take it from anyone else's in this one. And if you send a bowl, it will not reach him in any case because my granddaughter's husband will drink it himself out of simple cold. Sleep. Tomorrow you begin. Nerista lay down. She did not sleep for a long time, but when she did, she dreamed for the first time in a year of the corner stall of a barn in Ashenreach, and the straw pressed flat by a great body, and a golden eye watching her through the dark. In the dream, for the first time, the eye was not a lie. The learning took 26 days. Mev did not teach her, exactly. Mev sat in the corner of the low stone room where Nerista had slept that first night, and knitted, and said almost nothing. And when Nerista asked a question, Mev gave an answer that was usually one sentence long and usually correct. The learning itself happened in Nerista's own hands because Mev had been right. She had been born with it. What she had not been born with was the permission to use it, and permission, it turned out, was the only thing Mev could give. On the third day, Corinth brought her a ewe with a lamb dead in her belly for 2 days. I would kill her, Corinth said, to save the fleece. But I thought you should try. Nerista tried. The first half of the song was easy. She had done it 1,000 times. She laid her hands on the ewe's flanks, and she listened to the low, broken music of a body trying to expel a thing it could not expel, and she matched her own heart to the rhythm, and she pushed, gently, carefully, the way she had pushed 100 times in the healing barn. The ewe relaxed. Her breathing slowed. The pain song quieted. And the dead lamb did not move. Because the dead lamb was not a sickness in the ewe. It was a thing that had been, and was no longer. And the song of healing had no words for a thing that was no longer. The ewe would still die, because the dead lamb would rot inside her, and all Nerista had done was make the dying peaceful. Mev looked up from her knitting. Sing the other half, she said. How? The first half you pushed outward. The second half you pull inward. Toward yourself. A binding is a thing that has been put into a body from outside. You take it back out the same door it came in. Only the door this time is you. You are the door. The binding comes out of the creature and into you, and then you must send it somewhere, because if you hold it, you will die of it. That is the part that takes blood. The blood is the somewhere. Nerista stared at her. You want me to pull a dead lamb into myself? No, child. There is no binding on the ewe. I want you to try, because the shape of the motion is the same. Pull what is in her into you. You will fail, because nothing has been bound there. But your hands will learn the direction of the pull, which is the thing you do not yet know. Nerista put her hands on the ewe again. She reversed her listening. She did not push. She pulled. The motion felt in the center of her chest like grief. Exactly like grief. Like the thing she had done every morning for the last 13 months when she had woken alone in a cottage on a salt marsh and had felt the cold, empty half of her bed and had pulled that emptiness into herself so that she could get up and set bones. She almost laughed. Mev saw it. Yes, Mev said, you have been practicing for a year. Now stop, because there is no binding on the ewe, and you will only tire yourself. Nerista stopped. Corinth killed the ewe with a clean stroke, and they ate mutton that night. On the 10th day, Mev brought her a hawk that had been caught in a poacher's snare and had torn its wings so badly that the bone showed. There was no binding on the hawk either, but there was a deep wound, and the wound was more than the first half of the song could close, because the song could match a pain, but could not close a bone. Mev said, now pull. Not the wound, the fragments of the bone. Pull them together with the motion of the second half, and then push with the first. Both at once. Both at once. Yes, that is what you are for. Nerista laid her hands on the hawk and did both at once. The bone knit under her palms in the space of 3 breaths. She felt, exactly as Mev had warned her, the cost. A small, sharp pulling in the center of her chest, as if a thread had been drawn through her and out the other side. When she took her hands away, the hawk sat up on her knee and shook itself, and looked at her out of its yellow eye as if to ask what the matter had been. Nerista bled from her nose for an hour. "Cheap," Mev said, watching her stanch it. "That was cheap. A binding on a king will cost more." "How much more?" "I do not know, child. It has never been done in my lifetime. The last time a woman of this country put her hands on a silverthorn binding was 3 generations ago, and she was an old woman, and she did not die of it. But she did not rise from her bed again either. You are not old, but you are not trained either. I cannot tell you the price. I can only tell you that there is one. I will pay it. I know. That is the other thing I cannot teach you." On the 20th day, a rider came into the village from the south. He was one of Torin Halwy's surviving shields, and he had ridden for 3 days without sleep. And he came into the stone house with his leathers black with dust, and sat down on the floor because his legs would not hold him. And he said, "The houses have moved." Nerista and Corinth both stood up. "Which?" "All 5. House Brannock, House Caer Vale, House Erminar, House Stavone, and House Halwy. They have declared together, in writing, under all 5 seals, that the pledging of the Marchlands was not lawful, that Queen Kesseli is not a queen, and that Malveth Corwin is a traitor to the line of Corwin. They have called their war bands. They will march on Tormavale in 12 days. 12 days, Corinth said. 12 days, lady. The captain your father says you are to bring the healers south by the western road, which will be clear by then. He says the king will meet you at the ford of the Mern. The king has not been told where I am. The king has been told. The captain your father says the king went 3 days without food, and he had to be told, because the captain your father would not have a king of the Marchlands die of pride in his own woods. He is riding south now under an escort of House Halwy. He will be at the ford when you are." Nerista sat down slowly on the edge of the bed. 12 days. She had thought she would have 6 weeks. She had thought she would have time to fail at the second half of the song on more hawks and more lambs and perhaps, in time, on the binding of a small thing, a trapped fox with a curse laid on it by some old hedge witch somewhere. She had thought she would have practice. She would have 12 days. "Tell the captain," she heard herself say, "that the healer will be at the ford." The shield bowed his head and went out to be fed. Corinth Halwy sat down on the floor where he had sat, and put her head in her hands, and Nerista did not ask her what was wrong, because she understood. 12 days was not enough time for any of them. Not for the houses to gather. Not for Corinth to brief her father. Not for Nerista to be ready. 12 days was the time they had. Mev rose from her chair with her knitting still in her lap. "Then we work tonight," she said. They worked every night for the next 11, and on the 12th morning Nerista stood in the doorway of the low stone house with her herb bag on her shoulder, and her mother's copper ring on her finger, and the folded proclamation in the inside pocket of her cloak, and Mev stood in the doorway behind her and put a hand, briefly, on the back of her neck. "I will not see you again, child," Mev said. "You do not know that. I am old." "I know." Nerista turned and kissed her aunt's forehead, because it was her only aunt, and she had met her too late, and there was no time now to grieve for the years of not knowing. Mev closed her eyes under the kiss and opened them again. "Go," she said. "He has been waiting at the ford for 2 days." Nerista went. The ford of the Mern was where the river came out of the western hills and broadened into a shallow, stony crossing before the road turned south toward the Marchlands proper. She came to it in the late afternoon of a cold, clear day with Corinth at her side and a small escort of 6 riders from House Halwy behind her, and she saw, on the far bank, the banners. Not 1 banner. 5. The 5 houses that had declared. They were drawn up in a line along the river, and their war bands were behind them in the meadow, and at the center of the line, on a great gray horse, in a black cloak with no device on it at all, because he was not riding under any banner but his own, and his own banner was not yet raised, sat Vareth of the Marchlands. He had eaten. She saw it before she saw anything else. The hollows under his cheekbones were not so deep. He sat his horse straight. His hands on the reins were steady. He did not ride forward to meet her. The captains of the 5 houses did not ride forward either. They waited, all of them, for the healer in the gray cloak to cross the ford. Nerista understood then that this was also a ceremony. She had never been a woman who was brought to ceremonies. She had always been a woman who had slipped through the servants' gates of them, or who had watched them from galleries. She had never been the thing the ceremony was for. She walked her horse into the river. The water came up to the mare's belly and wet Nerista's boots and her skirt, and she did not look down at it. She looked at the man on the far bank, and she kept looking, and she crossed the Mearn with her eyes on his face. And when she came out on the stony bank on the other side, he dismounted and he walked forward, and he stopped 3 paces from her, and he did not try to touch her. Nerista of Ashenreach, he said, Varith of the Marchlands. He looked at her for a long moment. Then, in front of 5 houses and 6 captains and 200 warband riders, and his own cousin's daughter and Torin Hallway, who had a scar through his eyebrow, the Alpha King of the Marchlands knelt in the wet stones of the ford. A sound went through the assembled company that was not quite a gasp. Torin Hallway's face, Nerista saw from the corner of her eye, did not move. I cannot ask you to forgive me, Varith said, low and clear. I will not. I have done the thing that was done in my name, whether I willed it or not. And the kneeling is not for forgiveness. The kneeling is because you crossed the water to come to me, and I did not cross it to come to you, and I want every man and woman on this bank to see that the order of the crossing is not the order of the owing. I owe you. I will owe you for the rest of what is left to me, whatever that turns out to be. She could not speak. She reached down and took his face between her hands, because that was the only answer she had that she trusted, and she tilted his head up, and she looked at him, and she said, Get up. We have 12 days. 10 now, if I have counted right. Get up, Varith. I cannot do this with a kneeling king. He rose. He did not embrace her, because the silverthorn binding was still in him, and the ritual Corinth had described could not yet be safely risked. He stepped back. He offered her his arm, not his hand, and she took it, and they walked together up the bank to the waiting captains, and one of them, a tall woman in the green of House Erminar, stepped forward and bowed to Nerista in the old style, with her hand crossed over her heart. Healer, the woman said. The Marchlands thank you for coming. Nerista, who had never in her life been bowed to, did not know the right answer. Do not thank me yet, she said. It was, she thought later, the right thing to have said. That night they camped a mile south of the ford, and Varith did not come to her tent, because he could not. Corinth came instead, and sat with her by a small fire in a brazier, and told her what the last days had cost in the city of Tormavale. Malveth had learned some days ago that the 5 houses had declared. He had moved against Torin Hallway's remaining men in the citadel that same night. 3 of them had escaped. 7 had not. Queen Kessely had been seen at dawn the following morning on the south terrace of the palace, laughing. Nerista said nothing. Corinth said, He has called the full garrison, 4,000 men. We have, between the 5 houses, perhaps 2,500. Then, we will not win by numbers. No. We will win by the binding being broken before the garrison marches. Because if the king is himself again, half the garrison will not fight him. Yes. Then I have 10 days to be ready. Yes. Nerista looked at the small fire for a long time. Then she said, Corinth, I am ready now. I have been ready since the 2nd week. I did not tell Mev because she would not have let me go until she had taught me more. But the more she was teaching me was only refinement, the shape of the thing I know. Corinth looked at her. Then why, she said slowly, do we have 10 days? We do not, said Nerista. We have tonight. She did not tell Varith first. She told Torin Halwi, because Torin was the captain of the shields, and because Torin was the one who would have to give the orders, and because she had learned in 13 months of running that the only people worth trusting with a hard plan were the ones whose hands you had seen shake and steady again. She walked through the camp to his tent in the dark with Corinth at her elbow, and she spoke to him for a quarter of an hour while he listened without interrupting once, and at the end of the quarter hour he closed his eyes and said, "Mistress." "No, Captain. You are asking me to take you into Tormavale by a postern gate with 3 riders and a king who cannot be in the same room as you, in order to stand in front of Malveth Corwin and break his binding while he watches. That is a killing. I will not permit a killing of my king's mate on my watch. Captain Halwi, listen. I am listening. Malveth is waiting for us to come with an army in 10 days. He has made his plans for an army in 10 days. His ritual requires me in Varith's presence, under Malveth's witness, and it requires Varith's hand to do the killing. He has built a ritual room for it in the lower levels of the citadel. Corinth has described it to me. He thinks we will ride into it in 10 days because he thinks we do not know what it is. He has prepared every trap he knows how to prepare for an army. Yes. He has not prepared for one woman. Torin opened his eyes. If Corinth can get me into the citadel tonight, through the kitchen stairs she used for a year, I can be in the ritual room before Malveth knows I am in the city. I can break the binding before he can set the ritual. Without the binding, his case against Varith collapses. Without the binding, Kesseli is a lord's daughter who married a king under false witness, and her marriage is void. Without the binding, half his garrison changes sides by noon tomorrow, because half his garrison is still loyal to the old Alpha's line and has been waiting for a reason. And the king? The king does not come. The king rides out tomorrow at dawn with the 5 houses, exactly as Malveth expects, so that Malveth is watching the northern road and not the kitchen stair. The king does not know I am gone until it is done. Torin's face went very still. Mistress, he will kill me. He will not. Mistress, you do not know him as I know him. If I hide you from him for this, I will not be his captain at the end of it. You will be his captain at the end of it because you will have given him back his wolf and his throne. He will be angry. He will not unmake you. Torin looked at his daughter. Corinth looked back at him with a face that said, clearly, I am going with her father, and you cannot prevent it either. He closed his eyes again. A postern gate, he said. The river gate beneath the old mill, Corinth said. I used it twice a month for a year. The guard rotates at the second bell. I know the captain of that rotation. He owes me his sister's life. His sister. A child I delivered out of the palace in a laundry hamper 3 months ago when Malveth decided she had heard too much. She is in a village in the east. The captain does not know I was the one who took her. But he knows someone took her, and he has been looking for a way to repay it ever since, and if I present myself at his gate at the second bell tomorrow night, he will let me through with anyone I am with, and he will not report it until the morning. And once inside, the kitchen stair. Once up the kitchen stair, the dry corridor behind the old library. Once through the old library, the lower hall. Once across the lower hall, the ritual room. 40 minutes, father. From postern to door. Malveth lives in the ritual room. Malveth lives in the ritual room from the moment he wakes until the moment he sleeps, because he is a man preparing for a ritual he has waited 7 years for. He will be there alone at the second bell, because he does not trust a witness to the final preparation. That is the thing I have learned in a year of peeling turnips in his pantries. He has only himself. Torin was silent a long time. Then he said, Corinth. Father. When we are through this, come home. Corinth's throat moved. Yes, she said. Go, said Torin Halwi. I will tell the king in the morning that you are both gone to hold council with a friendly captain of the Western Road, and I will tell him before he reaches his horse, because I am not so old I cannot outride a king once in my life if I have to. Go, daughter. Go, healer. If you do not come back by the third sunset, I will ride on Tormavale with the 5 houses and burn it to the ground with Malveth inside it, and I will never forgive myself afterward for having let you go." "We will come back," Corinth said. "Go." They rode out of camp at midnight with 2 extra horses and no escort, because an escort would have been seen. Corinth had not exaggerated the postern gate. It was a low wooden door set into the river wall under the black bulk of an old mill, and a tired-looking captain in Malveth's colors opened it at the second bell without even looking at their faces. He touched his forehead to Corinth as she passed. She touched hers to him. They did not speak. They went up through a kitchen that smelled of old onion and wet stone. They went along a corridor behind a library that smelled of dust and mice. They crossed a lower hall under the guttering of one torch that had almost burned out in its bracket, and nobody was in the lower hall because nobody was ever in the lower hall. At the far end of it was a door of black wood, bound in iron. Corinth stopped before the door. "From here," she said very quietly, "I cannot go with you." Nerista looked at her. "He will know me," Corinth said. "He will not know you. You are a healer in a gray cloak whose face he has never seen. If you walk in alone, you have 1 minute before he understands who you are. If I walk in, I have no minutes. One of us must be ready to run back up this corridor and tell my father the plan has changed. I am faster than you." Corinth. "Go, Nerista." Nerista took her cousin's hand. She did not know what to say to the woman who had lived in a pantry for a year for a man she had never met, and a country that would not thank her. "Thank you," she said. "Go." Nerista went through the black door. The ritual room was long and low and lit by 9 candles in a ring on a floor of pale stone. The candles were not yet lit in the pattern they would need for the ritual itself. They stood in their holders unlit, in a circle the size of a small cart, and at the far edge of the circle a man was kneeling with his back to the door, pouring a fine gray dust into a shallow dish. He turned at the sound of the door. Malveth Corwin was younger than she had expected. She had imagined a silver-haired lord. He was perhaps 35, dark like his cousin, with a jaw that was almost the same jaw and a mouth that was nothing like the same mouth. He rose slowly. He did not look alarmed. "I do not know you," he said. "No," Nerista said. "You are not a servant. Servants do not come through that door." "No." He understood then. She saw it go across his face in one movement, like a curtain being drawn. He did not reach for a weapon. He reached for the candles, because the candles were the ritual, and if he could light them in the right order in the next 30 seconds, the ritual would begin. And if the ritual began, the binding itself would drag Vareth across every mile between the ford and the citadel and put the knife in his hand for him, because that was what the candles were for. The candles were the summoning. The summoning would deliver the hand that would do the killing, and it did not matter that she had come alone, because she would not be alone for long. She had 30 seconds. She crossed the room. He did not bother to fight her. He struck a spark. The first candle caught. He moved to the second. She did not try to stop him lighting the candles, because she had learned in the barn of a healer and in the cottage of an aunt, she had not known she had that you do not stop a thing by grabbing at its hands. You stop a thing by going to its root. The root of the ritual was not the candles. The root of the ritual was the binding itself, which was in Vareth, hundreds of miles away, and which she could feel the way she had felt the stranger's rhythm under the scar on her wrist for all the long months since it had first woken in her. She laid her hands flat on the pale stone of the floor inside the ring of candles. She reached across every mile between her and the ford of the Mern. She found him. She found, in the place under his breastbone, where his cousin had touched him between the shoulder blades more than a year ago, the small knot of not rightness that had lived there ever since. It was smaller than she had feared. It was also older. It had grown into him the way a vine grows into a wall. She pulled. The cost hit her instantly, not her nose this time, her mouth. She tasted iron. Her vision narrowed to the stone under her hands and the small black knot she was dragging out of a man she could not see, along every mile of winter country between them and into her own chest. Malveth, across the room, had lit the third candle. The knot came out of Varith. She felt it leave him. She felt, for an instant as short as a heartbeat, his shock, his bewilderment, his sudden and complete understanding that she was doing the thing they had agreed she would not do alone, and the beginning of a roar that was going to cross the same miles in the opposite direction in the next breath. The knot came into her. She had to send it somewhere, because Mev had told her so, and she had 12 days to learn where. And she had not had 12 days, and she had to decide now. And she decided, as she had decided in her kitchen in Marnmouth, that she would not kill. She sent it into the floor, not into Malveth. The stones under her hands were old, older than the citadel, older than the line of Corwin, and they had held the citadel up through 700 winters, and they could hold a knot of silverthorn binding for another 700 without minding. She pushed the thing out of her chest and down into the stone, and the stone took it. Her nose was bleeding, her mouth was bleeding, her vision was going. The fourth candle went out, then the third, then the second, then the first. Malveth Corwin turned from the circle of dead candles and looked at her across the pale stone. "What have you done?" he said. She could not answer him, because she was on her hands and knees, and the blood from her mouth was running onto the floor in a thin, dark line. She looked up at him. She saw, in his face, the understanding that his 7 years of work had just gone into a stone under a healer's hands. He drew a knife. He did not have time to cross the circle. The black door at the far end of the room burst inward off its hinges, and a great black wolf came through it at full run, and Malveth Corwin, who had never in his life seen his cousin in a true alpha's fury, did not finish raising the knife. The first thing Nerista was aware of afterward was that someone was lifting her, not carrying her. Lifting her. As one lifts a child out of a river. There were hands under her back and under her knees, and the hands were shaking, and she was being held very carefully against a chest that was also shaking, and a voice somewhere above her head was saying her name again and again, like a man trying to keep a candle lit in a wind. "I am here," she said, or tried to say. Her mouth was full of blood. "Do not speak," Varith said. "Do not speak, Nerista. Do not speak. You rode. I rode. Torin could not outride me. He tried. He rode beside me for the last 20 miles. He is coming up the lower hall with Corinth now. Do not speak." She opened her eyes. His face above her, in the candle smoke, was the face of a man who had found what he had been searching for 14 months, on a stone floor in a circle of broken candles, with blood on its mouth. And the look in his eyes was not rage at her for going without him. It was past rage. It was the thing on the other side of rage, which is the simple, exhausted knowledge that you cannot live if the person in your arms dies, and you cannot prevent it, and you will try anyway. "Malveth," she said, "dead. Kessely. I do not know. Torin will find her. Do not speak. Varith, Nerista, the binding is gone." He closed his eyes. "Yes," he said. "It is gone. I felt it go. I was in the saddle. I almost fell. It is gone, Nerista. It is gone." Good. Then she let herself go under, because the going under was the last piece of the work, and Mev had warned her there was a price, and the price had been waiting in the second half of the song all along. The price was simply this, that a woman who pulled a binding out of a king across 100 miles of winter country and put it into a floor of ancient stone did not stand up from the floor afterward. Not on the same day. Perhaps not for several days. Perhaps, Mev had said carefully, the old woman of 3 generations ago had not stood up again at all, but she had not died either. There was a middle country. Nerista went into it. She was there for 5 days. They did not move her. They could not, Varith said later, because the binding had gone into the stones of that room, and the stones of that room were now the thing keeping it quiet, and moving her while her own blood was still in the mortar would have unpicked all of it. So they made the ritual room into a sick room. They brought wool blankets and a brazier and a low bed. Varith slept on the floor beside the bed. He did not undress. He did not leave the room except to receive the captains of the 5 houses, who came in and knelt beside the bed in turn, and the new council of the marchlands, which convened in the lower hall because their king would not leave the ritual room until his mate opened her eyes. Torin Halwi found Kessely of House Morrowan on the south terrace at dawn on the 2nd day. She had tried to ride out. She had not been quick enough. The captains of her father's house had already been taken in the citadel at the 2nd bell, the night Nerista had broken the binding, and the terrace gate had been closed by a loyal shield. She offered Torin a great deal of money. He did not answer her. He led her down to the lower hall himself, and put her in a small cell there, and left her to be judged by a council that had not yet finished assembling. House Morrowan fell without a battle. They had bet everything on the ritual, and the ritual had gone into a floor, and their alliance with Malveth had collapsed with his throat. By the 3rd day the citadel was quiet again. By the 4th day, the news had gone out to every village on every road of the marchlands, and in fisher towns on the cold grey coast and in hill crofts above the western mountains and in the old stone villages of the north country where Mev sat in a doorway knitting. People spoke, quietly at first and then not quietly, of the healer from Ashenreach, who had walked into the citadel through a kitchen door and ended a war in an hour. On the 5th day, Nerista opened her eyes. Varith was asleep on the floor beside the bed, with his hand over hers. His hair had been cut. Someone had made him cut it. He had let them. She turned her hand under his, and his eyes opened at once, because he had not been sleeping deeply. "Varith," she said. "Nerista. I am thirsty." He laughed. It was a terrible laugh, a man's laugh with a great deal of weeping in it, and he poured her a cup of water from a jug on the floor and lifted her head with his other hand, and she drank all of it, and asked for a second, and drank half of that. "How long?" she said. 5 days. Mev. A message has gone to her. It went on the 1st day. It will have reached her by now. Corinth. In the lower hall with her father. They have not killed each other yet. It has been a near thing. Good. She closed her eyes, then opened them again. Varith. Nerista. I am very angry with you for riding. I know. You could have unpicked everything. You were not supposed to know until it was done. I know. Why did you? He looked at her. He was still holding her hand. Because, he said slowly, on the 7th night in your barn, when I pressed my head against your ribs and left, I was not saying goodbye. I was telling you, in the only language I had at that moment, that I was coming back. I did not come back, because my cousin put his hand on my shoulder before I could. I have spent every day since that night trying to come back. I was not going to let you break a binding alone when the whole point of the binding was to keep me from you. I was going to be there. I was going to be in the room. If I had been 30 seconds earlier, I would have been. You were 30 seconds later. I was 30 seconds later. I will not forgive myself for those 30 seconds. I do not need you to forgive yourself, Varith. I need you to be in this room when I open my eyes, which you are, which is enough. He bent his head over her hand and did not speak for a while. After a while, she said, "The scar on my wrist." He looked up. She held up her left hand. The silver scar that had burned for more than 8 months and been cold for 2 days and been warm again for the rest, was gone. The skin of her wrist was clean and unmarked. "The binding took it," she said, "when it went into the stones. Yes, I should be free of you. Yes, I am not." "No," he said quietly, "neither am I." He turned his own left wrist up. There was a new mark there, a small silver ring around the bone, thin as a thread, as if someone had tied a cord of moonlight around his arm and it had sunk into the skin. "It came 5 days ago," he said. "I did not put it there. It came on its own. Torin believes it is the mark that the first bond ought to have left if it had been given freely instead of through a deception. A true mark, laid down the right way, because you saved me willingly and I came for you willingly, and the two willings together made a thing that Silverthorn could not counterfeit. She looked at it for a long time. Then she said, Varith, Nerista, ask me, properly, not on a dais, not in front of a council. Here. He drew in a long breath. Nerista of Ashenreach, he said, who was also Wenna of Marnmouth, who was always the healer in the barn whether I knew her name or not. Stay with me. Be in my house. Be in my bed when I am allowed to ask that, which is not tonight, because you are bleeding from the nose again, and I will not have it. Be the person I come home to when I am a wolf, and the person I come home to when I am a man, and the person I come home to on the night I die, whenever that is. Because I have learned this year that I will not live past you by more than an hour, and I am at peace with that. Stay. Yes. Yes? Yes, Varith. He brought her hand up to his mouth and kissed the inside of her wrist where the scar had been, and then, very gently, laid his forehead against the spot. Exactly as he had laid his head against her ribs in the straw of a barn in Ashenreach on the 7th night, when he had been a wolf who was saying he was coming back. On a spring day 4 months later, in a meadow above the citadel, where the white flowers of the western mountains had begun to come up through the grass, the Alpha King of the Marchlands was married to the healer of Ashenreach in the old rite, which required neither a dais nor a pledging, and which had not been used in the line of Corwin for 6 generations. Mev did not come. She had sent word in the winter that she was old and would not travel, and she had sent her granddaughter's husband instead, a quiet man who stood at the back of the meadow and watched and did not speak. Mev had died in her sleep on the night after the message reached her. Her granddaughter's husband carried the news. Nerista had wept for an evening and then had gone on, because Mev had told her she would not see her again, and Mev had not lied. Torin Halwi stood at Varith's right hand. Corinth Halwi stood at Nerista's left. The 5 houses had sent their lords, and the 4 houses that had not declared in time had sent their lords also, and no one spoke of who had declared when, because a new country was being made, and the measuring of old loyalties would come later if at all. After the rite, after the feast, after the sun had gone down, Varith took Nerista's hand and walked her down from the meadow to the small wood at the foot of the hill. She had suspected, for an hour, what he was doing. She did not ask. In the wood, under the young leaves, he stopped. I have not, he said, been a wolf in your presence since the night you told me to go with Corinth in the heather. I have not wanted to be. I was afraid that if I came to you in that shape, you would remember the barn, and the remembering would be a wound, and I would not do that to you on our wedding day unless you asked. I am asking. He changed. The great black wolf she had fed broth to for 7 nights stood in the wood under the young leaves, and she knelt down in the grass, and he laid his great head against her sternum, exactly as he had done in the straw of a barn in Ashenreach on the night she had thought was the last. She put her arms around his neck, and she said, into the dark fur, the thing she had said in the barn on the 6th night, and had wept for in every season since. If you were a man, she whispered, I would have married you already. The wolf made a sound that was half a laugh and half something much older, and she laughed too, into his fur, and the moon came up over the wood, and somewhere in the citadel behind them the bells began to ring for the first time since the night of a pledging that had never, in the new reckoning of the Marchlands, actually happened at all.